June of 1878, the Occonee River had been rising for 4 days when it took the lower fields. By the time the water reached the old Sinclair bottomland outside Milledgeville, Georgia, it was moving fast enough to carry fence rails, a barn door, and the better part of a cotton gin shed 3 miles downstream before any of it snagged on the river bend at Hardwick. The flood of June 1878 was the worst the Baldwin County old-timers had seen since 1841. Nobody was thinking about what the ground beneath the bottomland might do when the water pressure hit it from above. They found out on the morning of June 11th. A farmer named Cornelius Amos Treadwell, whose family had worked the Sinclair bottomland for 30 years as tenant farmers, and who knew every feature of that land the way a man knows his own hands, rode out to check the flood's progress at first light. He was 43 years old. He had been born on that land. He had buried 2 children in the county churchyard and outlasted 3 landlords and 1 war. He was not a man given to invention. What he saw from his horse on the morning of June 11th stopped him where he stood. The flood had the surface of the lower bottomland in a pattern he had never seen in 30 years. The waterlogged soil had shifted and separated in long, deliberate rows, exposing what lay beneath it, not roots, not rock. Stone-capped burial containers, each one roughly 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, arranged in rows that ran as far as the floodwater would let him see in any direction. He counted the exposed ones within his immediate view, 41. In the space of approximately 2 acres of exposed bottomland, 41 stone-sealed containers, each one fitted with a cap of flat-cut granite that the flood pressure had partially displaced, revealing the contents beneath. Cornelius Treadwell rode to Milledgeville and told the Baldwin County Sheriff. By the following morning, 7 men had returned to the site. 3 of them opened containers. What they found inside was not what anyone in Baldwin County in 1878 was prepared to see. The skeletal remains inside the 3 opened containers measured, by the sheriff's own account recorded in his monthly report, between 7 feet, 8 inches and 8 feet, 3 inches in length. The sheriff's monthly report for June 1878 is in the Georgia State Archives in Morrow. It has been there since 1879. The relevant entry is on page 4. The official response to what Cornelius Treadwell found came quickly. Within 72 hours of the sheriff's report, a letter had arrived in Milledgeville from the Georgia State Land Commissioner's office in Atlanta, directing that the site be treated as a matter of state land survey interest pending formal examination. The letter specified that no further opening of containers was to take place, and that the site was not to be discussed publicly until the examination was complete. The formal examination was never completed. No state examiner was ever sent. Within 3 weeks, the Oconnee's floodwaters had receded sufficiently for the bottomland to begin drying. By August, the exposed containers had been recovered by natural soil movement and the slow creep of the receding water's sediment deposit. By the end of the summer, the surface of the lower Sinclair bottomland looked, to any eye that had not seen it in June, exactly as it always had. Cornelius Treadwell filed a written account with the Baldwin County Clerk in October of 1878, 4 months after the discovery. He was not certain anyone would act on it. He filed it because he believed that what he had seen deserved to be on record somewhere. That account is 6 pages. It is in the Baldwin County Courthouse records in Milledgeville. It describes the rows of containers, the stone caps, the 3 opened casings, and the measurements the sheriff took. It names the 6 other men who were present. It notes that 2 of those men had recognized the stone cap construction as similar to what their fathers had described finding during deep ploughing in the same bottomland in the 1840s. That last detail, 2 men whose fathers had described the same construction 30 years earlier, is not a footnote. It means this was not the first time those containers had been partially exposed. It means the 1878 flood was the second time. Treadwell was 57 years old when he died in 1892. He never received a response from the State Land Commissioner's office. The formal examination was never conducted. His account sits in the courthouse exactly where he left it. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as compelling as I do, hit subscribe so the next one reaches you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you tell it otherwise. Now back to the Ocheney bottomland and to what those two men's fathers had seen before them. To understand what was beneath the Sinclair bottomland in June of 1878, we have to go back not just a few decades. We have to go back to a Georgia that the plantation records and the settlement histories have never adequately described. The Ocheney River Valley in Baldwin County sits in the geographic center of Georgia's Piedmont. It had been continuously inhabited for at least 12,000 years before European contact. The first English-speaking settlers who arrived in that valley in the late 1700s found a landscape that had already been extensively shaped by whoever came before them: earthworks, mound complexes, terraced ridgelines, field systems whose scale implied organized labor over generations. William Bartram, the Philadelphia naturalist, whose travels through North and South Carolina, Georgia, East and West Florida, published in 1791, is among the most carefully observed accounts of the American Southeast before settlement. Passed through the Ocheney Valley in 1776. He described a series of earthwork complexes along the river's lower course that he estimated would have required, in his words, the labor of many thousands over a considerable period of time. Bartram's Travels has been in print for 230 years. Those passages have never been integrated into any mainstream account of Baldwin County history. John Millage, Georgia's governor from 1802 to 1806, and the man for whom Milledgeville was named, kept a correspondence file donated to the Georgia Historical Society in Savannah in 1890. In it are 3 letters dated between 1804 and 1807 from county land surveyors working the Ocheney bottomland. All 3 describe buried stone-capped structures encountered during drainage work. All 3 ask for instruction on how to proceed. Not one of those letters has a reply in the file. 3 surveyors, 3 no replies. No further mention of the structures in any subsequent survey record for that district. Enter Louisa Margaret Crane. Crane was a school teacher and independent researcher based in Macon, Georgia, who spent 26 years, from 1889 to 1915, working through county courthouse records, survey archives, and private family papers across central Georgia, documenting what she called the buried record of the old Oconee country. She submitted her completed manuscript to the Georgia Historical Society in 1915. The society declined. Their rejection letter, which survives in the Bibb County Historical Society's collection in Macon with Crane's personal papers, described her work as containing material that had not been subjected to adequate scholarly verification. The manuscript is in that same collection. It is 287 pages. It documents 41 accounts of anomalous buried structures in Baldwin, Jones, Putnam, and Wilkinson counties between 1800 and 1910. 9 involve skeletal remains estimated at heights exceeding 7 feet. Every account is sourced to a named individual, a dated document, or an identifiable archive. Her sourcing is meticulous in a way that the Historical Society's rejection letter never engaged with on its merits. Cornelius Treadwell was not the first man in Baldwin County to see what lay under the Ocheney bottomland. He was the first man to put it on official record. In the summer of 1849, a drainage crew working the same section of the Sinclair bottomland encountered, at roughly 3 feet of depth during a ditch cut, a row of stone-capped containers. The landowner, Phineas Rourke Sinclair, recorded the discovery in his plantation management ledger, donated to the Milledgeville Public Library by his granddaughter in 1932 and still in the library's local history collection. The entry describes the workers stopping, Sinclair inspecting the site, and the decision to cap the ditch and redirect the work. Sinclair writes that his father had told him the bottomland held old things and that the old things were best left alone. 3 generations of the Sinclair family had worked that ground, knowing something was beneath it. Treadwell, who had worked for them for 30 years, had never been told. When the flood of 1878 broke that silence, and Treadwell took it to the sheriff, someone in Atlanta was paying close enough attention to act within 72 hours. Atlanta to Milledgeville in 1878 was a day's ride. The letter from the state land commissioner arrived the day after the sheriff's report was filed, or the day after that. Someone was reading those reports. Columbia County, Georgia, 1871. A road grading crew working a state contract along the Little River exposed a buried stone construction described by the foreman in his project log as a field of covered chambers going further than we uncovered. The project log is in the Georgia State Archives. The follow-up notation in the State Road Commission's files states only that the section was completed without incident. The foreman's original description and the completion notation are in the same document. They contradict each other directly. Putnam County, Georgia, 1875. A well-digging crew on a private farm struck a sealed horizontal stone passage at 14 feet. The farm owner filed a notice with the Putnam County clerk. The notice is in the courthouse records. A follow-up notation 3 weeks later states the matter was resolved following a visit from a representative of the State Geological Survey. No Geological Survey report for Putnam County in 1875 exists in the Georgia Survey Archive. Wilkinson County, Georgia, 1883. A railroad construction crew working a branch line cut reported the exposure of burial containers along a half-mile stretch of right-of-way. The railway's incident log for that section references the report. The report itself is absent from the file. The crew foreman was transferred to a Louisiana assignment within the month. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. The Georgia State Land Commissioner's Office maintained a correspondence archive covering the period 1870 to 1900. That archive is held at the Georgia State Archives in Morrow. A records inventory completed in 1941 notes that the correspondence files for Baldwin County for the years 1877 to 1881 are listed as transferred to a secondary storage facility. The secondary facility has no record of receiving them. The 4-year gap in the Baldwin County correspondence files runs from 1 year before the Treadwell discovery to 3 years after it. But here is what makes the 1878 Oconee discovery different from every other anomalous find in Georgia's buried record. The containers were not the only thing the flood exposed. Cornelius Treadwell's 6-page account, in its 3rd page, describes something he had not mentioned to the sheriff on the morning of June 11th and did not include in his verbal report. He writes that on the afternoon of that same day, after the 7 men had returned and opened the 3 containers, he had walked the flood's edge further north along the bottomland, alone, while the others were occupied, and had found a section of ground where the flood pressure had done something more significant than lift individual container caps. A stretch of ground approximately 30 feet wide and of an indeterminate length had subsided. The soil and the stone cap layer had dropped together, revealing not a row of individual containers but a continuous interior space. He was looking down into a room. He describes stone walls, a flat stone ceiling partially collapsed by the flood pressure through which the subsidence had opened. He estimates the interior height at 8 to 9 feet. He describes the floor. He describes what was on the floor. Arranged in 2 parallel rows running the length of the visible space were skeletal remains, each one laid on a flat stone platform, each one of a scale that he could not reconcile with any human being he had ever seen. He did not go down into the space. He was alone, and the walls of the subsidence were unstable. He stood at the edge and looked. He counted 14 frames visible from where he stood before the flood's edge forced him back. He writes that he told no one else at the site that day because he was not certain the others would believe him and because he wanted to return with a measuring instrument before making any further statement. He never returned. The site recovered itself over the summer, and by the time Treadwell felt steady enough to go back with a rod, the subsidence had filled with sediment and there was no longer any surface, indication of where it had been. He writes, on the final page of his account, "I am setting this down because I am not a young man, and I do not know how many more floods this river will bring. What I saw on the afternoon of June 11th was not a burial ground in any sense I had been taught to understand. It was a hall, and the people who were laid in it were not people of ordinary size." Cornelius Treadwell, Baldwin County Courthouse Records, October 1878. It is still there. The Georgia Historical Society has never adequately explained why its rejection of Louisa Crane's 1915 manuscript 41 Sourced accounts, 287 pages, every reference identifiable, was based on inadequate scholarly verification rather than any specific challenge to any specific source. It has never explained why the State Land Commissioner's correspondence files for Baldwin County for the years immediately surrounding the 1878 discovery are absent from the Georgia State Archives, while every adjacent county's files for the same period are intact. It has never explained why a state examiner was directed to the Treadwell site in June 1878. The direction was confirmed in a letter that still exists, and the examiner was never sent. Why did a railroad crew foreman in Wilkinson County get transferred to Louisiana within a month of filing an incident report about burial containers along a right-of-way? Why does the Putnam County Courthouse contain a notice about a sealed stone passage but no corresponding geological survey? Report in the State Archive. Why did 3 separate county surveyors write to Governor Milledge's office between 1804 and 1807 about buried stone, structures in the Oconee Bottomland, and why does not one of those letters have a reply? These questions do not go away because institutions refuse to answer them. The lower Sinclair Bottomland outside Milledgeville, Georgia, still exists. The Oconee River still floods it in wet years. Somewhere under that ground, at a depth ranging from 2 feet to perhaps 6, the stone cap layer is still intact. The containers are still in their rows, and somewhere in the northern section, at a location Treadwell knew precisely and described in his October 1878 filing but never returned to, the subsidence has filled with sediment and the hall is still below it. The 14 frames he counted from the edge are still on their platforms. Treadwell's account ends with a practical note. He writes that the stone construction he observed was cut and fitted with a precision he, as a man who had spent his life watching other men build things, could not have reproduced with the tools available to him. He did not know who built it or how long it had been there. He knew only that it had been built by people who understood stone, understood scale, and understood that what they were making was meant to last. It has lasted. The Oconee floods every few years. The ground shifts, the sediment moves. The rows are still there. The official history of Baldwin County, Georgia, tells us it is a region defined by plantation agriculture, the antebellum capital at Milledgeville, and the Civil War's passage through the Georgia interior. What the evidence tells us, the sheriff's report, Treadwell's 6-page account, the Sinclair plantation ledger, the 3 unanswered letters to Governor Milledge's office, the missing state correspondence files, and the 287-page manuscript the Georgia Historical Society declined without engaging its sources, is that beneath the Oconee Bottomland there is a record of construction and burial on a scale that has been consistently, and at times urgently, kept out of the official account of that region. That is not a theory. That is a collection of documents pointing at the same ground from 7 directions across more than a century, every one of them ignored, removed, or declined. If you've made it this far, you already know that buried history does not disappear because institutions ignore it. It disappears when no one looks for it. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. These records survive because people refuse to stop asking. Next week, I'm bringing together 4 threads, Tennessee, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, and showing how a single Bureau of Ethnology policy decision made in Washington in 1894 connects all of them. The man who wrote that policy left a paper trail. The archive is in Ohio, and the language in that document only makes sense if the people writing it already knew exactly what was being found in those river valleys and flooded bottomlands. You won't want to miss it.